Good morning. My name is Mariana and I'm the founder and owner of Mariana Carroll Consulting. What an absolute privilege it is to welcome each one of you to this online conversation with learning and development thought leader and advisor, JANE FRANKEL. At Mariana Carroll Consulting, our aim is simple. We want to be your emerging technology consulting and training provider of choice. We love to just add value to people and, as you know, doing new and different things. I'm truly of the opinion that nothing is impossible and challenges usually present the greatest opportunities. Thank you for taking this quick 30 minutes. I know you are all very busy, but what a privilege it is to just take an opportunity to learn from each other and to gain some new insights and just ideas. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, so let's just get the conversation going. This conversation actually started with technology thought leader and advisor Kamal Ram Singh on how the IT organization of the future would manifest and what considerations and implications this may have on the envisioned enterprise IT function of the future. That conversation sparked fascinating discussions around future staffing and skills planning. Leading on to that, we had our second conversation with human resource thought leader and advisor, Jane de Kooker. And Jane so powerfully prompted us that the time is now to start a series of online conversations around the importance and the implication of learning and development in our digital age. And by the way, if you have missed any of those conversations, please go to our website, marianacarroll.com, where you'll find the recordings and it's under our blog section. So we actually like things to just be practical. So today we start with step one. As we continue this conversation with learning and development expert, JANE FRANKEL, and Jane will help us to just understand some of the specific requirements from a South African legislative perspective that will have an implication on this transformation journey and digital skills. And then she'll also just help us to understand what we can actually use within our organizations to start on this journey. It is now my absolute privilege and honor to reintroduce our previous guest speaker, Jane de Kooker. Jane is happily married and the mom of two. Jane is all about connection, collaboration, partner networks, synergistic opportunities, and as an independent human capital management consultant, and that's a mouthful, she is promoting organizational effectiveness and business transformation by harnessing the time, talent, and energy of the workforce. Jane will provide a quick context just around our previous conversation, which will then also set the scene for the rest of our conversation with Jane. Jane, it is such an honor to also welcome you as our guest speaker this morning. Jane is a motivated, committed person who combined all of her previous knowledge and skills and for the last 4 years led the learning and development function at Dimension Data. She is passionate about development, especially when it comes to youth, and that also the connection of many years of being a teacher and a social worker. Jane specializes in graduate programs, learning and management frameworks, and also learning and development strategies, also with a specific focus around legislation such as BBBE requirements. Jane and Jen, it is such an honor to have you share your insights, experiences, and valuable knowledge with us this morning as we continue this very, very important conversation around planning for the skills gap in this future envisioned digital ecosystem. So on that note, it's now my honor and privilege to hand over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Mariana. It's absolutely an honor and a privilege to be on this webinar again this morning. And I think so important just to link back to where we were a couple of weeks ago and to thank everybody that has dialed in or joined on the live webinar this morning to say thank you for your inputs. We absolutely were overwhelmed with the number of questions, the feedback that we got post the webinar. So thank you for that. I want to acknowledge that first and foremost. And then if we just go back to the themes that have emerged through the questions that came to us, I think to really call it out, the one key question that's coming up time and time again is the how. And I think that is top of mind for all of us on the call this morning to say, how do we assist business to meet the regulatory requirements while simultaneously moving to the new digital way of learning and interacting? And when we look at it from a South African context, because it's great, we shared all the stats and the research globally, but when we take it back down into a South African context, you know, is it all doom and gloom? So that is the question, but I think more importantly that we acknowledge the reality within South Africa and that we creatively respond to this. So what do we do? How do we take this forward? And how do we meet business where business is at? So for me today, and very, very honored to hand over to Jane that is joining us on the online conversation this morning, is to say to Jane, can you please share with us and help us to understand or help us to address step one on this transformational journey? Thank you, Jane.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks very much, Mariana. So really, I think we're all talking about the journey that we're going on. and I think particularly when you live in South Africa, any journey that you take is going to have a couple of potholes, just the reality that we live in. And so for me, the first pothole that we need to acknowledge when we start to talk about learning and development or skills development or capability is the reality that for most companies, HR is a grudge purchase. It's something that companies acknowledge that they need, but are not really willing to pay for. I think within that, the L&D budget often sits in HR, so faces the same sort of challenges. And we have to acknowledge that business is trying to do more with less and desperately trying to cut costs. So the focus is definitely on the need and acknowledging that there's a huge need for capability, growing capability, for skills development. Business is actively, simultaneously looking at how can I do this in the most cost-effective way. And really, when we then start to look at that, so what is business prepared to pay for? And that's our next pothole. The next pothole very much looks at the legislative context that we found ourselves in South Africa. And there are two key pieces of legislation that we need to be aware of. The one is the Skills Development Act, which is SETA. Okay, well, all the time, how do we get us changing, partly because the detail will take the entire conversation. But I think that we need to acknowledge that business is looking all the time at where can I get my SETA rebates? How can I bring in additional income for learning and development? The second, which is probably more prominent at this point for a lot of companies, is your broad-based Black Economic Empowerment, or BBBE. And the codes, okay, so every company is measured on those codes and they get a level rating off them. The level rating that they get then has a significant impact on their ability to do business in South Africa. The codes changed coming into this year, and they really are very much focusing. The good news for us, trying to focus on skills development, is that there's a very, very key focus on skills development. Probably the challenge for us is what is being recognized in terms of learning and development according to those codes. The reason that I'm bringing it up is that it's obviously significant in terms of how do we then offer learning and development in organizations, particularly as consultants. And I think that what's important to note is that all of the new codes are pretty much intertwined with each other. So failure to deliver on one pillar is going to have a knock-on effect on all the other pillars. Skills development, as I mentioned, is a priority pillar. And if you don't get 40% of that pillar, so 40% of your points, you drop, the entire scorecard drops a level. So really a huge pressure on business to start delivering. What part of the focus for me of what's happening with the drive from a BBBE perspective is really to redress the inequalities of the past. And the key focus, or perhaps where business is being rewarded the most, is on true upskilling. So upskilling around qualifications, certifications, to ensure that people in South Africa are more employable in the future. So what the BBBE scorecard does for that is to say, if you're offering somebody a certification or a qualification, you can include both their training spend as well as the salary for the time that they are studying, which obviously means an increased spend, which means increased points for BBBE. And that really is the thrust of what's going on. So we have to focus on upskilling. But we have to bear in mind that companies are very, very much focused at this point on where can they get their points for triple BE. They're unlikely to focus on any other kind of learning at this point, because to get those points, the expenditure is extreme. It's moved from 3% on the old codes to 6% on the new codes. And if you think your skills development levy is only 1% of payroll, to now be trying to spend 6% of payroll on previously disadvantaged employees, it's really a step up for business. What does this mean for us moving into the new digital age? Okay, it means where we are focusing on our skills development and looking at the skills really need to be in line with how the modern learner wants to learn. So how does the modern learner want to learn? They want their learning on demand. They want sound bites of information. They want to be able to use that information and apply it immediately. Does not really lend itself to a full qualification over 12 months. Learners also wanting to learn online. They're wanting to be very collaborative. They're wanting to learn from each other. We know, in fact, that the most successful type of learning is on the job, okay, where we're learning from each other. And from a triple BE perspective in particular, you are not gaining as much from a points perspective, obviously because your expenditure is less and because you can't include salary, okay? So we need to start being a whole lot more creative with meeting business where they're at, where their key focus is trying to get their points for triple BE, with the move to the new, which is focused and should be in line with what modern learners and how modern learners want to learn. So we need to start thinking really, really differently in terms of how we offer this to organizations. But as Jenny mentioned, for me, it's not all doom and gloom. I think we need to be significantly more creative in terms of how we approach business. We have to help them first meet their triple BE, because I don't believe they're going to be prepared to have the conversation about anything new until that pothole has been filled. And then we can start looking at what are the more creative ways. And one of the areas that I thought that we could start looking at is start looking inside our organizations. What do we already have that we can start making use of or start propelling and proactively engaging? And really, I suppose that is my speciality from what Mariana, how Mariana introduced me. And that really is around graduates, or maybe not so much graduates anymore, but your millennial generation. So definitely not the favorite generation to enter organizations. Millennials, by their nature, we know, are not really strong on taking accountability or resilience, but they bring in some incredible attributes to an organization. They are natural team players. They are naturally agile and able to move. In fact, that's one of the critiques that we have about them, is that their retention is low. But if we start harnessing the positive of that, to say they're agile, they can engage, they work naturally in teams, they celebrate diversity, they're focused on purpose going forward, and they really are looking for organizations with a purpose. They probably are best placed to take an organization into the digital age. And my view is that perhaps we should be focusing more on using them as trendsetters in organizations instead of what we're trying to do at present, which is knock them down and force fit them into the organizations that we have. And the truth is, the organization that we have now is certainly not going to be appropriate in even 3 years' time. So perhaps we need to change our orientation a little bit about millennials, and we really need to start using them in organizations to do what they do best, which is to trendset and to take the organizations to the next level. And an interesting concept, and perhaps one of the hows and how we can start with millennials, is to look at a reverse mentoring approach. So that really came out from Jack Welch in 1999, and it looks at using your millennials in a mentoring situation, but a reverse mentoring. It becomes a win-win for the organization. Millennials are desperate for mentoring and desperate to grow. It's one of the key focus areas for them when they choose an organization is, am I going to grow and am I going to be mentored? They equally, for me, have a lot to offer in a reverse mentoring situation, particularly for your baby boomers, who are very much still in organizations and who can learn from the millennials in terms of the new way of being. And then to start perhaps setting up organizations slightly differently, so that we are playing to millennial strength, as opposed to trying to force fit them into the organizations that we have at the moment. So an interesting thought, perhaps, and to start utilizing the millennials that we have in the organization. They currently are making up more than 37 to 40% of organizations anyway. So by their nature, okay, when you start looking at those sort of numbers, they are going to enforce change into the organizations into which they're going. And perhaps we need to spend a little bit more time allowing them to make their mark on organizations, because I do fundamentally believe that if we start capitalizing on what this generation brings to the organization, we are going to naturally start seeing the skill sets that we are looking for coming in. They are technology natives. They really do have the ability to take the organization to the next level. And we perhaps need to assist them. So I'm not for 1 second saying that millennials don't need a lot of support and a lot of growing in organizations. We all know that they do. But to perhaps set them free a little bit more and see what they do and learn from them and with them while we are growing them into the kind of future generation that we want them to be at the forefront of where our organizations are going. So that pretty much, and I would like to open it up for discussion, that pretty much is where I think we could start. That if we're looking for a first step, the first step needs to be looking internally. I think if we start doing reverse mentoring, what we're giving to organizations is an almost low-cost option. We're using their employees and we're using the natural IP that exists within a generation, and all we're asking them to do is to share that. It would involve quite a mind shift for organizations, definitely. But I do think that if we start with that, we will see quite monumental change quite quickly in organizations moving forward. So just to sum up, the first focus that we have to do with any organization, and I can talk about BBBE for the next 5 hours, but the first focus is to ensure that business is meeting their BBBE requirements and getting the points that they need. Failure to do so is probably going to result in a number of businesses failing to do business. In the future. But once we've got that down, to then start focusing with business on how do we start creative conversations with the millennials, starting a reverse mentoring approach in organizations where we can ultimately have a win all the way around. Happier millennials, where they're going to be less destructive. An organization that's probably doing better should increase the retention stats of your millennials in your organizations and the whole organization moving forward to the digital transformation and the skills that we're looking for.
Jen and Jane, thank you so much. Jane, I think so many little nuggets in that conversation, and thank you for just, I think, changing our perspective on how we actually view these type of things. It is really such an honor to have you both joining us and just sharing some of your experiences and also some of what you see in the market that's currently happening within our organizations, but also in the bigger context of South Africa. So we want to open the floor for some questions from the audience, and I really want to urge you to please participate in the questions. We did receive a question from Gary, and he's asking, how well are HR leaders actually aware of this? And should the HR team actually be the place where we start to have these conversations, or is it more business focused? So how do we go practically? So what's that point of contact? And are HR actually aware of this?
So thanks for the question, Mariana. I think HR definitely should be aware of this. And if they're not, perhaps we need to do some significant work in those organizations. And I think definitely, and it's an interesting thing around conversations. So conversations for me need to be broad. I think that the HR teams in organizations certainly need to be brought up to speed on BBBE and its requirements. Okay, because as I mentioned before, those pillars are all interlinked. So if you start looking from HR and you're not getting your recruitment right from a BBBE perspective, it becomes very, very difficult to meet your target spend on skills development. Okay, if you're not choosing the right vendors to offer your skills development in organizations, it starts to impact on your preferential procurement scores. So really the whole thing is completely interlinked. So definitely the start would obviously be HR, because I think that HR have a lot of business interest at heart, okay, and they are most often holding the conversations in business. But equally for me, to only have the conversation with HR and to not have conversations in business talking about the significance of the decisions that they are making, I think that's where your problem comes in. Because I think that business often looks at HR as a stumbling block and goes, HR are putting in too many processes, there's too much red tape here, I can't get on with business. And when you start to have business conversations and you start to explain to business what the legislative requirements are and what the impact of not meeting those requirements are for business, you suddenly start to see a shift in business, actually. And you start to see better decision making all the way around. That it's not HR being difficult, but a business imperative and a business case for strategy of the organization going forward. And certainly a lot of business people, so within Dimension Data, when I started to have business conversations, HR certainly understood, but when I started to have business conversations around it, there was a sudden shift in business in terms of the understanding of the knock-on effect of business's ability to do business going forward. I saw a question come through from Gary, just as I was chatting, around, I hope you're not only going to do training for points. And I think, Gary, that's a brilliant point to have made and a great question. I think that it can never be just for points. Okay, that if we're starting to just do tick box exercises, we are really going to run ourselves into problems. And I think that whilst one needs to acknowledge the BBBE aspect of it, when you're starting to develop a learning and development strategy, the BBBE is one lever that you need to pull. It has to fit into the overall learning and development strategy of the organization. So acknowledging where we are going and how does BBBE become an enabler, okay, of where the strategy is going holistically, as opposed to let me meet my points, let me tick those boxes, let me just pick people that I can put on qualifications so that I can get my points. I think that might be a short-term one for business. I think from a long-term perspective, it's going to harm business unbelievably, okay, from a long-term business strategy perspective. But I think also to pretend that it doesn't exist in the short term is going to harm business. So I think all the time for me, it's around finding the balance of, are we aware of what the requirements are? Can we find a way holistically to ensure that we're doing it all? Okay, so almost running parallel universes in business, but understanding that often you've got to get a foot in the door with business. And if you start talking to business around meeting their BBBE requirements, you are going to get a seat at the table at this point, because it is causing so much pain and so much anxiety. And I think within that, one then needs to be creative. But your point is well made. We cannot get into a situation where we are just ticking boxes for points. It needs to fit into the whole L&D strategy.
That's wonderful, Jane. Thank you so much. And Gary, thank you for that insight as well. I think, as you said, the business case is really a key consideration, and we really need to just consider that. And Jane, there's also another question from Jane. So she's saying CSI is only 5% now of the scorecard, which is minuscule. Over and above skills development, how should HR practically get involved in enterprise development and preferential procurement?
Okay, so thank you for a lovely question, Jane. I think the CSI has moved down quite significantly from a percentage weighting. I think that there's lots of roles that HR can play. So if you look at the employment equity, okay, and it really speaks to the recruitment, what is HR doing around ensuring that you are getting the correct kind of talent in for an organization, okay, making sure that we are boosting on that level. I think from an enterprise development perspective, there's a huge focus on supplier development, okay, so move from your CSI, which is really giving back to the community. What this is focusing on for me is very much the empowerment of business, okay, and small businesses. And I think that HR can play a huge role there in terms of equipping the organization that we have to almost mentor or skill up new and up and coming organizations. So really imparting skill, okay, and offering a mentoring on that and building up on young entrepreneurs and empowering them to be successful, because if we can get them successful from a quality and a delivery perspective and from a management perspective, they then become our suppliers, which obviously then from a triple BE perspective helps everybody's scorecard. I do think I'm talking a lot about triple BE, and I think the ethos for me of the underlying of triple BE is really good, okay, and it's proactive, and it's looking at how do we empower and build a nation. And part of that is acknowledging that big business in the way that it's changing is never going to be able to equip for sufficient jobs in this country. And one of the focuses, and really the focus on supplier development or enterprise development, is starting up new startups, smaller companies where we are empowering people, that they do not have to join the full corporate world, but they can start up their own companies. There is a huge amount that big business in South Africa can do towards that. From a preferential procurement, just to touch on that very, very briefly, is to say that we have to be looking at who are we bringing on as vendors. Okay, do they meet the standard? And that standard on the one part for me is definitely from a triple BE, looking at their level, but probably more important, and it's back to Gary's point, of we can't just be taking in vendors or signing on vendors because they're a level 1 on triple BE. Do they actually meet the need of the organization? Okay, can they offer quality? Are they competitive on cost? All of those things that big business look at, and I think that HR has a huge role to play, but a lot of it is around education, okay, and it really is around the empowerment of people and the smaller players in the market to build them up so that they can be significant contributors to the economy. And I think that HR, I think business generally, so as I don't want to limit it to HR, but for me, business generally has a role to play if we are going to move South Africa forward from an economic perspective.
Jane, that's great, and thank you so much. I think Gary actually summed it up nicely in one of his comments where he said BE is usually seen as so negatively, and it has a negative impact on, I think, just the economy and our organizations. But how great is it if we can turn that into a positive story and actually start utilizing that to build out this new envisioned future organization, and especially when it comes to digitalization. I just quickly want to end and say thank you so much. It was really an honor and a privilege to have all of you just spend some time on this conversation. I think, as we said before, this is only the beginning, and we'll continue to have these conversations, as I think it's a great way of just thinking differently, coming to new perspectives, and then also as a collective to start to just change the way we operate and how we also prepare ourselves and our organizations for this envisioned future. I really hope that we can connect soon, whether it's around skills and capabilities assessments or online conversations. I also quickly just want to mention that we have an upcoming cloud course. It's happening the 19th until the 23rd of June, and there is an early special rate if you register by next week. So pop onto our website, marianacarroll.com, for more information on that. And then I really hope to see you all at our next conversation. Jane and Jen, thank you again so much for all your insights and just provoking these type of conversations and the thoughts and new perspectives. And yeah, thank you all for joining, and I hope you have the best Friday.